You've eaten Gotham's wealth, its spirit, but your feast is nearly over.
This isn't a black hole. It's an operating table. And I'm the surgeon.
Why aren't you laughing?
From this moment on, none of you are safe.
Welcome to the Batman Book Club, a podcast exploring the Dark Knight Library. I'm your host, Ryan Lauer. The Batman Book Club is a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network, hosted by Batman on Film. Just go to batmanonfilm.com, click on podcasts, and you'll find the Batman Podcast Network. The Batman Book Club is also on Patreon, so if you like what's going on with the show and you want to help support the show and keep those generators running in the Wayne Manor study, just go to patreon.com/thebatmanbc. Now, thank you for listening to episode 204, Dark Knight's Metal. And of course, class is in session because the professor's here. I do believe he is the boss of Paul Herman on the Comic Binge. Speaking of Batman on Film, he's a longtime, I don't know how Bill splits it up, a historic contributor of that website. It's Chris Clow. Chris, hello, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back, Ryan. I'm honestly I'm a little surprised that you were open to this story
Okay.
because I feel like I kind of threw, and it kind of came out of the blue in my head too, but man, I am looking forward to talking about this one with you. Absolutely.
Me too. Your employee, Paul Herman, he and I know were talking, and he'd said something about like you were really, he's like, oh, dude, Cloud, he's excited about talking about this. And I said, I look forward to talking about this one too. I was gonna ask you before recording, and then I was like, no, let's just save it for the people to hear. But I am slightly embarrassed that I do believe this is only your second time on the show, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
You don't
what
need
was
to be
the
embarrassed.
No, because it's a darn shame that I haven't asked you more often to come back here. So I'm sorry it's been such a gap, but I forget. And then I'm sitting here, I'm like, I can picture talking to Clow. I don't remember what book it was.
It was Face to Face by James Robinson.
There we go. Okay, 1 year later. Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And per your
Hmm.
recommendation, I ended up getting the deluxe hardcover of that story finally,
Oh,
and
sweet.
passed
And
my longtime trade to Mr. Paul Herman. And
good.
and it looks good at that
Yeah.
size. It's
Okay.
nice, yeah.
What is the paper quality of the deluxe edition? Is it
It's
glossy?
good.
Is it like the trade?
It is glossy.
It's glossy. Okay.
So it is not like the trade, but the size does it a lot of favors, between
Yeah.
Leonard Kirk and Don Kramer. It's a good looking book. And seeing it a little bit bigger definitely helps expand the canvas a bit, literally and figuratively.
Let's see. What about the extras?
They're
That's what usually
not,
gets me.
yeah, and I think you've seen them because that version is on Hoopla, if I'm remembering
Hoop,
correctly. And
yes.
they're fine. They're
Okay.
good. They're not super extensive, but it was also one arc
Okay.
that was, I mean, we talked about it. It's like a
Hmm.
getting back to basics kind of a Batman story. And
Yeah.
but there's a couple good things in there.
Now, I just typed it into the Google machine, episode 109, Face to Face, 2 years ago, June of 2022. Oh my goodness. So yes, hopefully next time it won't be such a gap. But the Face to Face was the last arc before Grant Morrison took over on the
Yes.
Batman title, in which maybe you'll plug that away at the end of this show. I have to ask, did you order or get the Absolute Batman and Son?
Absolutely.
Okay. I
I
just
got it. I
tossed the softball at you on that one, but
Hey, no, got it just the other day. I haven't actually cracked it open yet, but I really like that it is everything up to the very beginning of RIP. So it's a reasonably complete volume. I had a similar collection. They put out like back in, gosh, must have been like 2010, 2011, maybe. They did Batman the Black Glove Deluxe Edition that had the same
oh,
amount of issues. So it's kind of a thick book.
gotcha.
Uh, And then they went the omnibus route and released three different volumes for Morrison's entire run. But yeah, this absolute, it is Batman 655 through 58, which is the core Batman and Son
Hmm.
story. Then it jumps ahead to 663 to 675, and RIP started at 676. So it's a really good way to sort of get ready for RIP for those who are inclined, of course.
I'm very, let's see. I do have all of those singles. I never doubled down on the trades for those. And
Mhm.
so the absolute really has my interest because also it's an absolute and it's Batman.
Yeah.
Um, but then like the price, I was like, oh, it's like, justifiably so. It's a thick one. It's got a lot of issues in it, but it's like, I don't know. Maybe I dance with the devil and hope that because sometimes in some places it does drop pretty, like certain absolutes do drop, but then I'm rolling the dice because it also might sell out and then, so
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm holding
I
off.
understand. I understand where you're coming from. Right now, let me just look at it real fast. So Amazon has it for about 115, and that's from a 150 cover price, and that is pretty steep, for an absolute edition. Granted, there are a lot of issues in it, but In Stock Trades right now has it for 87. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's more digestible or not, but it's pretty. I mean, Andy
Yeah.
Kubert's artwork blown up that size looks great. Honestly, one of the things I'm looking forward to checking out in it is the prose issue, Batman 663, The Clown at Midnight,
Yeah.
because it looked pretty good in the deluxe size, but I imagine in absolute size, I'll be interested to see how it reads at that size. And that's actually
Yeah.
the next issue that we will tackle in the ongoing run in our sub-series on the Comic Binge called Knights Never Die, that goes through that run issue by issue.
Hmm. Yeah. See, I was really hoping because in stock usually week of release they do a lot of 50% off.
Mhm.
And I know now, like when you're talking, I was like, okay, so it's gonna be like 75, and their lowest they went was 87. It's only $12. I know, but then I have things I'm definitely buying in August. So then I became an
Sure.
adult and
Yeah.
started thinking about expenses. I was like, oh, I'm gonna try and be responsible, but it's probably gonna end up in my cave. Can't I don't
Hey, the price is going to drop at some point.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'd be surprised if this one sold out quickly. Sometimes those absolutes can take years before they sell out,
Yeah.
and then they go years before they're reprinted, of course. But they just put Court of Owls back to press too.
Yeah,
And
finally.
yeah, it took a long time. It was like 3 years, I think.
Hmm.
And but it did come back, and it came back a little more expensive. The whole inflation thing drove the cover price on that one up, but it's kind of moderated a bit, and I imagine it'll be the same with this one. So even if you don't jump on it right away,
Yeah.
I have a hard time seeing this become scarce, but knock on wood. Yeah,
Yeah. Knock on wood. Um, let's move on from
sure.
Grant Morrison and let's go metal. Let's talk Mr. Clow. Dark Knights, metal. Now, this is a fun, interesting challenge, but it's a pretty simple challenge. I'll get to that in just a second. Dark Knight's Metal obviously was released in 2017 and 2018. It's written by Scott Snyder with art by Greg Capullo. Obviously, it was released physically, digitally, in a hardcover, I believe in a trade, uh, collected in an omnibus, collected and released in an absolute edition, available in DC Universe Infinite, available on my favorite app of all time, Hoopla. Basically, any way you want to get Dark Knight's Metal, you can get Dark Knight's Metal. It's available everywhere. Now, we're talking strictly of the 6 issues of the main series. Was ever I saw on Wikipedia somewhere it was talking about it was a 7 issue, and then it really had me because I don't want to be sitting here spitting off, false information. But what I was looking at in Hoopla was very much like, no, this is 6 issues. And I think I remember it was 6 issues. And what I was reading online said something about 7 issues, but it was six total. That's the main story was 6 issues, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For some reason, I mean, a lot of DC event series go to 7.
Hmm.
So it was honestly a little surprising that this one was six, but there were also a lot of ancillary tie-in material to this
Yeah,
story too.
absolutely. But also, I think we can all agree six is good.
Six is good. I in preparation for this, I went a little ham,
Oh,
but
yeah. Okay.
yeah, but I'll talk about that when we
Okay.
get there.
Well,
Yeah.
let me ask you the usual questions then, Mr. Clow. What version did you read of Dark Knight's Metal?
Okay, so
He wheels back. He picks up.
here's what I
Who's
yeah,
it?
here's what I did. I read the entirety of the omnibus in preparation for
Whoa.
this. Um,
Dang.
so that's let me double check here. I think it's 27 issues total.
This
Um,
guy did the work.
well, I'll get into why, but then I also I did read the Absolute edition.
And you got the absolute.
Yeah,
My
so
goodness.
it's kind of it's kind of fun because
Sure.
when you go from like the omnibus
Hmm.
and you finally get to one of the main chapters, because the only thing that's in the Absolute are the core six issues. So I would read the all the stuff in between, and then I would pull the Absolute for the main issues. And
Hmm.
seeing Greg Capullo's artwork at that size was a lot of fun. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I dovetailed between the omnibus and the Absolute edition.
Mad respect. I went to my favorite app of all time, Hoopla. Greg Capullo's art, also digitally bright and shiny, looks damn good. I think we'll have a lot of good things to say about his art in this story. Do you remember when you first read this book?
I was picking it up when it came out. I was living in Chicago at the time, or
Hmm.
just outside of it, so I was picking up all the issues from Oh Yeah Comics in Skokie,
Shout out.
which was my home LCS at the time.
Hmm.
And I even went to the midnight launch for the first issue and got
Oh,
a
nice.
midnight exclusive variant for it at the time. So yeah, I was reading it as it came out, but I was not as engaged with this event as I could have been, or
Okay.
as engaged as I've been with other DC events, and kind of whipsawed between like main issues, but then occasionally like one or two of the tie-ins, but I didn't get a very complete picture of the story.
Okay.
Um, then I kind of fell off of it halfway through. And then several months later, after the Justice League No Justice miniseries started, that kind of seeded Scott Snyder's run on Justice League, I went back and I read just the core miniseries and developed opinions about it. And that
The
was,
opinions that are coming.
yeah, that's how
Um,
I absorbed it the first time.
I too read this as it came out. And I did read, like, I picked up because I was telling myself of like, I'm going to go all in on this next event in which the two, which we're not going to talk about, but the two prelude issues of Dark Days, is it the casting and the forge or the forge and the
Yeah.
casting? I forget the order. Okay, the forge and the casting. I bought those two. I did not like the naming of that because it had nothing to do with metal. I thought, and so, but then I went into and bought and got the main series run as it was coming out, as well as the one shots of the Dark Batman, which I loved.
Hmm.
Um, Okay, third, lastly, maybe most importantly, why did you choose Dark Knight's Metal?
So specifically, the thing that I guess germinated the idea, I was a guest on another podcast called Digging for Kryptonite, hosted by Anthony Desiato, that takes a look at Superman stuff.
Hmm.
And he was doing kind of a quasi event on that show called Red Skies, where he would look at all of the core crisis events. And he invited me on for to break down Death Metal, what ended up being the sequel to this
Yeah.
story. So, Death Metal, I had only ever read the main series of and a few of the issues of Justice League leading up to it, but that motivated me to get a fuller picture of that story, and I read pretty much the entirety of it, including the tie-ins and the stuff in Justice League that led up to it. And I remember enjoying it more than I thought I would, and certainly more than I did the first time I read the core miniseries. And it just kind of got me wondering, well, would I feel that way about metal now? Would
Hmm.
my perspective on it improve if I decided to start from the first page and absorb everything? So one of the reasons I reached out to you is because I think this is one of the only Snyder Capullo stories that you haven't done yet, but
Hmm.
also uh I've heard, occasional uh perspectives that you've shared on Grant Morrison's run, and Morrison's Batman run does not have a small influence on this series. It has a rather large influence.
Hmm.
But this is also just a really weird kind of next step for Batman storytelling because this is, for all intents and purposes, a cosmic scale DC Universe event that
Hmm.
is rooted in the Batman character with Batman iconography, with Batman lineage. And but it tells a story that is, arguably not traditional Batman by any stretch
Hmm.
of the imagination. So I just thought it would be a good piece to add to the Batman Book Club puzzle
Hmm.
because it owes everything that it is to Batman and tries to say a lot about him, but is also very much like a its own broader, crazy mosaic of a story.
Uh, that is the rule. If it's not a flat out Batman story, Batman has to be an integral part of the story. Otherwise, it's like, then why would we talk about, you name it, Garfield's Christmas on the Batman Book Club? It doesn't make sense to me. So I'm like, those are my rules. And so you chose metal, and I totally agree with you. It seems like it's a DC Universe story, more so than just Justice League. It's a DC Universe story. But Batman would be the first name on the cast sheet. And it's rooted, like you said, of Batman, 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 Batman. Snyder in this story is like are key components of his and Capullo's run on Batman. It's like building off of those, including those. So it's just like it is a no-brainer to me of like this is completely a Batman centric DC Universe story. I let's see. I had Eric Carter on here and he chose Last Night on Earth one time and I told them you have done something that's rare. You have brought to the table a Batman story I don't really like.
Hmm.
But I was really looking forward to that conversation because I said, you love it. And I'm not going to come on here and just be like, it's dumb, it's stupid. I'm like, no, we're going to actually talk about it because there are things in here I do like, things in here that I don't like. And we'll talk back and forth, get perspectives and stuff. Grant Morrison, heavy influence on here because Scott Snyder has said Grant Morrison is his favorite Batman writer. Heavy influence on this story. And Javi Trujillo, I know you're listening to this. You're a damn liar. He loves to spread misinformation that I hate that Morrison Batman run, and that is not true. RIP frustrated the hell out of me and still does to this day. The ride all the way up to then was a blast. So that knowing that going into this, well, you said you were going to do metal, and I informed Eric Carter you're not alone in your book choosing, Eric Carter. There is a book coming up that we're going to talk about that I'm not a fan of, and that is metal. I like, I can't say to what level you fell off of the story while following along. I was very much wanting to go all in on it, reading, like I said, the one shots of the Dark Batman, which I do think is one shots and stuff. I think that they're pretty damn good. I really enjoy those. Really trying, and about halfway through, I think, was I reviewing this for BOF? Might have been.
Hmm.
Halfway through, I stopped buying the physical issues because I was getting too frustrated with the story and went to reviewing them and not buying the physical copies. Now, Mr. Cloud, knowing you were choosing this, I instantly thought, and I shout out to our mutual friend Ryan Haas, who even said this. He's like, "Oh man, if there's anybody to have on to talk about that book, it'd be the professor. So I too look forward to things that you have to say and where we meet in this Dark Knight's Metal Wild story, knowing that I'm not that big of a fan of this. But I did give it my all. I read the two prelude issues and then I read all of the I didn't go all in like you did. And then I read the 6 issues of the main story and took some notes. So let's go ahead and let's dive in. Where would
Sounds
you
good.
like to start as the guest?
Let's,
I mean, not
I
going to take you through
guess
like the story points, but maybe your thoughts on like overall thoughts or what you really be like, oh, I want to talk to you about this or this. Go ahead.
one of the things that I find pretty fascinating about metal, regardless of where you come down on how good the story is at the end of the
Hmm.
day, is just that this is the path that was chosen to follow up Endgame, basically. Uh, I think it's reasonably fair to characterize Snyder and Capullo's run on the ongoing Batman title as largely celebrated. You know, we have,
Hmm.
especially among Batman fans, we have our own perspectives about how strong some of the individual stories are. Like I'm not a huge fan of Zero Year, for instance. And Super Heavy kind of leaves me cold in certain respects, but I did like Endgame. I thought that Endgame was a good note
Hmm.
to go out on for it. So having this story having have it been seeded by prior issues that Snyder and Capullo collaborated on. That is a really intriguing idea because yes, Batman is the poster boy of the DC Comics universe and the DC universe line itself, you know, regardless of how people feel about Batman being a part of that larger cosmology of the DC universe. The
Hmm.
fact of the matter is that he is, he's the biggest seller. So the
Hmm.
most people who are reading DC Comics are reading Batman. So even just from like a selling perspective, DC kind of nailed it because, well, we'll just do it. We'll do a big DC crossover event, but it's going to be led by the iconography of the Batman. So
Hmm.
in that respect, I find it really interesting. Narratively, the things that it's trying to follow up on from the Snyder Capullo run and by invoking different elements of the Morrison run and, earlier DC history, especially in those first two one shots, it's so unique. Does that mean that it all combines into a monumentally excellent story? No, no,
Hmm.
I don't think so. But it does have ambition.
Hmm.
And I admire the hell out of that ambition.
Hmm.
And the the core miniseries, reading that you can do it, but it became very clear to me reading the omnibus that that is an incomplete experience. On the other hand, though, the complete experience is also really lopsided because the majority of the story leading up, or everything leading up to the final issue, is just darkness, 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 darkness the whole way. There are glints of hope in some of the revelations that are made in some of the
Hmm.
tie-in material, but it's lopsided just because it's kind of a deus ex machina in the resolution. Everything just immediately improves by the time issue 6 kicks into gear. So in that respect, is kind of a weird reading experience. It might feel more balanced by just reading the core miniseries, but after reading all these tie-ins, it is incomplete if you read it that way. And
Can
I'm
I
not
ask
sure if that
you?
makes. Yes, please.
I was going to say, can I ask you how do you think it's fair to compare it with Flashpoint and say maybe Flashpoint is a little similar in that regard?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
'Cause I'm not the biggest Flashpoint person either, like the problem with an event like Flashpoint, and honestly with an event like Final Crisis too,
Hmm.
is that the tie-in material didn't have an abundance of importance to the core narrative. The gimmick with Flashpoint was that this is an alternate DC universe, but it's ours. It's
Yeah.
just been changed. So that created a lot of interesting corners to explore and how things were different. Like Abin Sur is a Green Lantern, and Thomas Wayne Batman, of course, probably the best contribution that story made.
Hmm.
But the core story was really all you needed. Same
Okay.
with Final Crisis. Creators probably didn't know what the hell was going on with it. Though the core
Yeah.
series is pretty much all you need, save for like one or two little exceptions. With this, the tie-in material gives pretty important information to how everything
Yeah.
works. And yeah, it's
So,
sprawling.
because, and I only say it with Flashpoint because I do think when we covered Flashpoint last year, talking about it, I do have like, I don't remember all that I said, but I have a positive feeling toward Flashpoint in that main story. But I do think it seems for a story that's, so massive and you only read five Flashpoint issues, it seems kind of small. And it's like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm missing a lot of things. And I've read some of the tie-ins. Some are cool, some aren't. Here with Metal, it can feel like what you just said of like, if I only read those six issues though, it seems like there's a lot more. But I don't, if I'm not all in on those six issues, I don't like the whole like, well, it's because you didn't read everything when it's kind of telling you you only need to read these six issues. And then if you're interested enough, and I'm like, but my interest isn't there to go outside of the one shots, but to do the other tie-ins. But then also like, but I do wonder if I just go all in like you just did, a 27, 28 issue omnibus to read the whole thing, how will my mind change? And I'm like, but it's tough for me because the main story doesn't get me. And it's kind of frustrating. I'm glad you said the word ambition because I totally applaud ambition. I totally applaud when Snyder is, when he goes for something different. He's built on the groundwork that he's laid. He isn't forcing, you know, pieces in. It does seem like it's something in he got into this habit. I know he was very active on social media back in the day, and he would talk about like this is the story we've been building toward. And I think he said that for Last Night on Earth. I think he said it about Metal. He might have said it about Super Heavy. Like he started to become a rhythm of every Batman story was we've been building to this. But here it's like actually I think he's got proof of like yeah, there's Court of Owls, there's the is it Dionysium that's an Endgame.
Mhm.
Barbados is from Morrison's run. Like, yeah, it does make sense. But I do think the story collapses in its ambition and it becomes frustrating as I'm sitting and I'm just like, for crying out loud, like Wikipedia has a great summary that works so much better than him trying to go through and explain every single connection in great detail. And then introducing it seems like we're in issue 4, issue 5, introducing more and more and more. And it's just like that turned me off as a reader, where it's just like, I can't make sense of what the hell you're talking about. But the positive aspect of this is like, that doesn't mean that I think this story is, uh, that I said nothing positive to say about it. I thought about it and I wrote it down. I said, I'm not, let's see, I like what they're doing, not why they do it. In the sense of the opening of the book is the Justice League in front of Mongol, in front of like a combat pit. And I like that they're there working together and that's cool. The the word that they used and then they turn into the Power Rangers and connect their bots then becomes like, I don't know that I like that. The aspect of Batman on the run and he pulls a Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows where there's multiple Batmans. And so Justice League's like, well, which one's the real one? They chase each one individually. I really like that. I think that's really cool. That's kind of total Batman. It builds on the very first issue of Snyder and Capullo's Batman run with the face changer mask. And then it's like, but then there's dialogue to try and explain every single thing. And I'm like, I don't need that. I don't need that. Trying to explain, I'm an idiot with science. So I'll just go ahead and throw that one right away. When it comes to matter and antimatter and me, I seriously looked up on Google multiple articles and I'm like, science always made me feel like an idiot and I can't connect the dots. I can't connect the dots with matter and antimatter and all that stuff. And it's like he tried giving a little clinic to me, giving a clinic of making sure every single thing connects. So like, see, I laid the groundwork, I explained it. And then I'm just getting lost and tired of just reading this stuff. And that's where I think my frustration with metal is. despite the fact that it's, in the cosmos, which is, ooh, you say that word to me, and I'm like, ah, I shiver. It's not my thing, especially putting Batman in that stuff. But I will always give stuff a fair shot. That's a lot of me babbling of like, that's, I think, the best way I can kind of put out like why metal becomes a frustrating read for me. And I probably haven't read it since 2018. So that's why I was also looking forward to it. 'Cause I'm like, okay, there's been distance here.
Sure.
I've learned more DC universe knowledge since, and I'm like, okay, I can bring that to the table and read this with a little more of an open mind, but I still came to the same conclusion.
Mhm. That's good. I mean, the story has not changed since the
It's
last
the same.
time that you read it. And look, having the knowledge about the way that DC Universe crossover stories typically work is nice, but I mean, I'm with you in the sense that there is a lot of expository information over the course of the core miniseries.
Yeah.
And if things were set up as well as DC and the creators told us it was,
Hmm.
then they shouldn't need to do that much exposition. It's like big walls of text on certain things. It's more befitting a Kevin Smith comic book than maybe a Snyder Capullo joint, so to speak.
Hmm.
But reading everything. So let me go back a little bit because
Sure.
when Metal started, I was part of a different podcast at the time, and I told the guys I was doing the show with, "Hey, there's these one shots that are coming out for a new DC event. Scott Snyder is a popular writer. It's probably not going to be too much for you guys to get into it. Let's talk about them." And they were like, "Okay, sure, we'll pick up these one shots." And as soon as like I got into page 3 of the first intro one shot,
Hmm.
I knew I had made a horrible mistake with
Of recommending
because
to these other guys.
yeah,
Okay.
because I was under the impression that because of Snyder's popularity,
Sure.
that translated into maybe a more inclusive event that
Hmm.
wouldn't be so super reliant on DC Universe history.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was giving me a run for my money. And I went, oh God, I thought I was dropping them into a 101 course, and this is more like a 400. And they're not going to know what to make of this. And they
Yeah.
didn't. When we got together to talk about it, it was mostly just me asking or answering questions about DC continuity going back to Flash of Two Worlds, and I was not expecting to have to do that. Uh, so it comes out of the gate really strong as a statement saying this is like a full-on cosmological event
Hmm.
rooted in the imagery of Batman. And the reading experience of the omnibus that I just had, I think one of the things that I take away from it is that in the middle of it, I really enjoyed the experience. Like the interweaving of different threads. There are two main crossover stories in the omnibus. One that's like Gotham Resistance, that's between Teen Titans, Nightwing, Suicide Squad, and Green Arrow. It's just 4 issues. And then there was another one near the end called Bats Out of Hell that's Flash, Justice League, Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, and then another issue of Justice League. Um, and those were fun because you get to see these different corners while the league is busy engaged in the main
Sure.
elements of the story. Um, and the first one in particular, the Titans Nightwing Squad Arrow crossover, gave some pretty important information because it helped the heroes to realize how they could kill people from the Dark Universe with nth metal. Like it
It's
was a piece
important.
of information. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is a piece of information they didn't have, and that
Nth,
was what gave it to them.
NTH. You've always said nth or ninth.
Yeah, nth.
Okay. I've
Yeah,
always said nth as well. And I was thinking about that reading it this time, like, because they jump from nth to flat out 10th.
yeah,
And so then I was like, wait, have I been saying it wrong all this time? I was like, I need to ask him this. So yeah, okay. We've been on the same page. Nth metal.
yeah, yeah, nth metal. And so I mean that's pretty important information. And then the Justice League Flash Green Lantern crossover was more just like setting the table for what the last two issues, I think, of the main series was going to be about. And there's some fun kinds of interactions that you see between the eponymous Dark Knights and other
Mhm.
members of the League. Like there's a really great face-off between the Dawnbreaker and Hal Jordan. And
Nice.
Jordan's will doesn't break. He's not afraid. And that's one of the things that he does not have in common with other members of the League. A lot of the other Dark Knights are able to bring members of the League to their knees just by virtue of fear.
Hmm.
And Dawnbreaker can't do that to Hal Jordan. There is a way that he does get the drop on him, but it's not by making him afraid. And I enjoyed that. I thought that was really cool.
Sure.
Um, and then, there are those one shots, those are all in the omnibus. And then there's three other one shots that are peppered between the different issues: Batman Lost, Hawkman Found, and Dark Knights Rising: The Wild Hunt. And that last one is probably the only one that I would characterize as like that should have been included
Mm.
in like a main collected edition. Everything else, though, a comic book crossover, particularly a big event, should be exactly what you described a while ago. You should just feel obligated is the wrong word, but you should feel like the only thing you need to keep up with is the core miniseries. And the other tie-ins are there if you want more from a particular character you like. When I was a retailer, that's how I always advise people. Yes, this little pamphlet says buy all these issues. That's not how it works. Buy the main miniseries if you're interested in the event, and then if the event goes into other corners of the universe with other characters that you like, then read those and enjoy them. At the end of the day, that's the purpose, is to enjoy the stories. Um, and Metal's not like that, and I think that it gets hampered
Hmm.
by the need to go beyond the six issues, in addition to all of the expository information that it's dumping in the core miniseries that kills a lot of the momentum of the story, like the tension and the overwhelming sense of darkness that you get from the Batman Who Laughs and Barbados and all of these other things. It's kind of stopped in its tracks if you have to read a manual about how these things work.
I agree. So you've
So,
said
yeah.
Barbados, and I've always said Barbados, and I've always laughed that I've pronounced it Barbados because that was another one of like, well, I feel like it would lean in on the bat part, but maybe it is Barbados. So you've always said Barbados.
That's what I've always said, but I don't feel very
Not sure.
strongly about it.
I think we're both
Barbados,
right. I think
there
we're
you
both
go.
right. There's no wrong answer.
Barbados would make sense considering who and what he is, especially after this story.
Yeah.
I would not challenge you.
Um, so like that part being said, then let's dive in a little more on the story of itself. I think it is interesting that this was, you know, this was post first season of Stranger Things and the Upside Down. I quickly equated this to the Upside Down. And you know what I mean? It's something of a cousin of it, if not. And it's like, sure, what if there was, it wasn't just a multiverse. It's like all the multiverse is all up here, but you flip it, and now you've got like the dark side of that. I'm like, okay, that idea in itself is pretty cool. The look of uh the Batman Who Laughs, I think is cool. His one shot is maybe the best thing out of everything I read with Metal. Did you like the one shots? You've mentioned them a couple times, but I guess I never asked. Did you like them? Some?
For
Eh.
the most part, I
Yeah.
did.
Okay.
But there were some that didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. He's goes, so this stuff, and it's like it seems like it's leaning really into horror, in which I think Greg Capullo can do a banger of a job on with horror. He kind of showed it with Death of the Family in the
Okay.
Batman. I mean, he did. You could say Court of Owls aspects of it were pretty horrific, especially Batman number 5. Uh,
Yeah.
the Death of the Family, I thought like it did a great job with that. So like those ingredients, it had me. Um, and I don't know where I get lost. Maybe it just flat out is just a combination of what you just described, and then also for what I'd mentioned of Snyder just being way too exposition heavy on all of it, which in one level is like, okay, you got a guy who is doing the work. He's not cutting corners. He's making sure all the information's there. I think there's also a challenge there as to be a good writer is get the point across in like concise concise information, not short, not, in 3 words, but like in what you feel is appropriate to keep that momentum going. Because if your momentum slows, it affects what you just said of tension. It affects like dramatic effect of turning that page and, something big happens because it starts to just slow the pacing of the story. And it's something when you look at these panels and pages of Capullo, there's purple freaking lightning everywhere.
Yeah.
And there's dark shadows everywhere, and there's monsters, and there's a baby dark side. All this stuff visually looks cool, and then it's like, but it's unfortunately it just slowly progresses throughout. Um, quickly, I would say Court of Owls loved that story when it came out. Continuing to go back to Court of Owls does not diminish that story. I don't get that excited seeing them pop up continuously. I think out the gate it was fantastic, like A plus material, and going back to them doesn't work as well for me. They weren't so crucial in this. They were one element of the 5 metals. They introduced Batman to one of the 5 metals, and that he needs to open, or that the dark multiverse needs him to be exposed to allow them the gateway into this universe. That right there, can't believe I even spit that out. I think it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so that crucial part's there, and also the entering, like the dark multiverse entering the DC universe happens because of the Court of Owls and Baby Darkseid. Um, and then ultimately Barbados. Uh, I'm trying to think where like a next point to move on. Like the I don't know, because like it's kind of a little jumping. I don't want to jump too far ahead,
Mhm.
but I'm trying to think of like where there's an absence of Batman when he gets, it seems, sucked through the portal when the
Yeah.
multiverse jumping, and then the next time we see him is he's attached to the dark multiverse. Is it that I don't know the term, but it's almost like um the
It's sort of like
tower,
yeah, it's like a tuning fork, they said, the different
and
uh
it's Old Man Bruce
yeah.
in that one. And that's where Superman reunites with him to save him. And is there more, is there connective tissue in one of those tie-in issues in a Justice League one to make that a little smoother? Or is what I experienced, no, that's it?
No, the Gotham Resistance crossover, Titans, Nightwing, Suicide Squad, and Green Arrow, all that stuff took place between issues 2 and 3.
Okay.
So, like the experience of reading the omnibus when you get to the end of issue 2, then you go through those 4 issues of a crossover, and then you get to issue 3 and you get a better sense of what's going on. It seems like there's more distance that passes,
Hmm.
and I think that helps, at least when you do see or you get an idea of where Bruce is. But that is an issue with the core miniseries, is that it does feel like it's pretty abrupt. And I mean, even reading the core miniseries, you could argue that it's just perpetual darkness until the end of issue 5 before issue 6 picks things back up to close things out. And that might seem a little imbalanced, but yeah, like I said before, it's even more so because everything just targets issue 6 in the omnibus. And it's definitely a strange thing to behold. A lot of those the Dark Knight's one shots, I think, were between 2 and 3 as well,
Okay.
but those came out in such rapid succession. I don't know if those necessarily count in terms of the amount of time that you feel, but
Yeah.
getting additional context for where these Bruce Waynes went wrong,
Hmm.
it was an interesting exercise, and
Yeah.
it's something that, is very unique to metal, I think.
Hmm. I think so too. Um, much like you'd said Thomas Wayne Batman, maybe that was Flashpoint's biggest uh its star.
Mhm.
Maybe the Batman Who Laughs is the star of metal because we're still experiencing the Batman Who Laughs.
Mhm.
I only read it once, but I actually really liked the Scott Snyder and Jock Batman Who Laughs. That is it. Oh, what's the Punisher like Batman that's in that one?
Oh, I can't remember what his name was, but he was actually supposed to show up in Metal and they cut him.
Yeah. When I was looking stuff up, yeah, there was a list of different of more Batmans that Snyder initially wanted to include in this, but ultimately he had to cut them. I wish I would have marked that because I could list them off real quick. It was like one Bruce that was in an Arkham Asylum because is that he murdered his parents?
Or he was framed to,
Framed.
or
Okay.
it had looked like he had murdered his parents. And then another
Okay.
one where he was like merged with Gotham City itself.
Yeah, which what?
Yeah, right.
But this one, like I thought he was effective in that story. But the Batman Who Laughs overall, that's the point I'm getting at here. Is like I think he's the made the biggest impact from this story that still carries on into some stories today. I hope. DC sometimes I don't think they do a good job of like limiting exposure. They kind of overdo it a little bit. I think Thomas Wayne
Hmm.
Batman was overdoing it for a little bit, and then sometimes put on the brakes, which is good. That way, and I think should use wisely with Batman Who Laughs. Regardless, um, what's so rather than being like critical, what's like something really worked for you that you want to talk about? Something that whether it's story, characters, setting, um, drawing, whatever, like with metal that you're like, oh, you have a full-on positive vibe of this aspect of metal.
Ultimately, I think it is the way that it ends.
Hmm.
Um, at least in the sense that there are some DC Comics fans who kind of underestimate Batman's leadership position in the wider DCU.
How dare they?
Um, yeah, kind
For
of.
shame.
Yeah, no, hey man, it's not a it's an incomplete picture. Like I get, and even to some degree, I sympathize with people who see definitive Batman as just like within the first 2 years of his career, before
Hmm.
any additions to the family, and he's just focused on the core rogues gallery. Like there's a class of Bat fans who that's the only Batman stories they accept,
Yeah.
and that's fine. But there is a lot of narrative value that I think has been proven over and over again by DC Universe creators about Batman's involvement in the wider construct that is the DCU, and specifically his involvement in the Justice League.
Hmm.
He brings a really important grounding presence that the entire team benefits from, in addition to being tactically brilliant. Um, and Metal pushes those elements of Batman's character pretty hard. And considering the way Snyder's run started, where it was attractive to Batman only fans, I think it makes sense to introduce or at least to give service to the idea that he does maintain a really important like tactical leadership position, but also a moral leadership position. Superman gets, correctly, he gets the lion's share of the credit for being the symbol of hope in the DC
Hmm.
universe and for being that sort of guiding moral philosophy that all the heroes operate from. But Batman plays a part in that too. He just doesn't like to emphasize it. But the fact that it's there does make it fair game to write a story about. And ultimately, I think that's what Metal wants to be about.
Hmm.
But how effective it is in actually communicating that side of Batman to the people who read it, that's debatable. I don't know if this is necessarily a story I would put in someone's hands to justify Batman as a symbol of hope from darkness. But Metal definitely wants to be about that, and I appreciate that.
Well said. I think it's definitely ingrained at the beginning, even in the two prelude issues of I think it's a point they've reiterated like different members of the DCU of Batman's probably got a plan for that. He's probably already thought of that. He's probably got a plan for that. and mentioned that quite a few times. So Snyder's, laying the groundwork, what we all know, but making sure that making sure we know they know that what Batman is in that level. So there is the respect of everybody towards Batman and what he is. And ultimately it's like as long as there's like I don't know, I can always be appreciative of that for sure, rather than well, this is going to be a Green Lantern story. So, opening 2 pages, we're going to make sure Green Lantern stumps Batman and kind of like embarrass him. And it's like, yeah, now let's put Green Lantern up on a pedestal. It's like, no, it's a lazy way of doing it. Because I think you could almost argue it's heavily Batman's the first cast member here, but I do think it's like Wonder Woman and Superman have they drive a lot when stuff is darker than dark. When Batman is lost, it feels in these main issues, they're driving force. Superman to just try and track down Batman and what's going on. Wonder Woman with Kendra trying to, you know, track down another aspect that's equally important. Um, there's two things popped in my head. So you'd mentioned that comes ultimately at the end. 10th metal armor.
Hmm.
I don't remember all the words behind it. I don't know that I really like it. To me, it seems pretty abrupt, and
Yeah.
that all of a sudden we jumped to another form of metal. Here's suits. Boom. That's how we take them out. That was a
Mhm.
little abrupt for me. So where
Yeah.
you said of like a seventh issue, I don't know. Because at this point too was, I knew I was getting frustrated already at this point with the story, but could have been less abrupt, more time until they got it. That could have also
Agreed.
welcomed Snyder to type out, 3 more pages of exposition on 10th metal and stuff too that I also didn't need. Uh referenced, I'll get to a simple question here in a second, but like opening pages, there's a lot of emphasis on 4 tribes: the wolf, the bear, the bird, and the bat. I will come full, I'll be fully honest with you. I don't know what the hell that means. Even in rereading, I don't know what any of that means. What's the connection?
Primarily to the return of Bruce Wayne. And some of that was not referenced at all in that first issue of Return of Bruce Wayne. But it's a connection that's supposed to have been seeded by the fact that Darkseid transported Bruce back in time, and that's what placed him in the position to be exposed to Barbados for the first time. They got him on the radar to set this whole plot in motion over eons. But the first 2 tribes, I don't think that they really reference those at all to speak of in Return of Bruce Wayne. Maybe they did it in some other stories that I'm not familiar with, but
Hmm.
that seemed like it was mostly engineered specifically for metal. And then, this story does a lot with Carter Hall
Mm-hmm.
and the bird side of the equation. I don't know if that necessarily came from Snyder as much as maybe DC wanted to put Hawkman back in play, which they did in an ongoing shortly after this that Robert Venditti wrote, I think. But yeah, it seemed like the Hawkman connections, they were decent, but they tried to pay those off really quickly at the end too.
Yeah.
Especially considering the focus on Batman that we'd had and a couple of other like characters in terms of just like the core concept of the whole series. But the Hawkman idea, I think that's where the bird tribe really sort of comes into focus. But they kind of just use that as one little switch to flip
Mm-hmm.
to get everything moving in the direction of the heroes by the end of the story. At least that's the impression I got.
Um, bless you for getting that impression. I did not. I chalked it up to my brain's not working that way, and I don't know. Do you think that opening page then? We know that's a cowl. Is that Bruce Wayne Batman, you think?
I
Says
think so.
50,000 years ago.
Hmm.
I take stuff extremely literally. So
Sure.
I see that I instantly think it's Batman Bruce Wayne unless something's gonna hardcore tell me otherwise. Then in this, Snyder could have snuck it past me and I was none the wiser. Do you like Joker Dragon?
I guess. I mean,
All
I
right.
think it ultimately it's just like it's kind of just a visual cue more than anything else, and we don't really
Sure.
get like obviously the iconography of the Joker and the overall look of the Joker plays a big part in the Batman Who Laughs himself. In the one shot, but also just in his look. But the Joker's involvement is relatively limited over the course of this event until the final issue.
Hmm.
So the dragon, it was just kind of like it was fun to see, but I can't say I was like pushed hard into liking
Yes!
or disliking it. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Finally, we deserve this.
It didn't do that for me, but if it did it for other people, then cool.
All right. I fully admit that I kind of rolled my eyes. I think I did back in 2018. I knew it was expected this time around, so I didn't roll my eyes, but I was like, I don't, not, I don't, yeah, I guess I just don't care. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, Admittedly so, and I've been told by many to read Sandman, and I haven't.
Hmm.
So the inclusion of Dream did not have the effect on me that it probably should have. Do you remember if that was a big deal on your part that you felt something for it?
I felt something for it only insofar as I understand Dream's
Okay.
position in DC history, but I actually haven't read that series.
You haven't read Sandman
I've
either?
read some of it. I haven't read
Okay.
all of it.
I think I
But
started and I knew I was feeling like I was forcing myself and I'm like, this is not the time to read Sandman. I'm just forcing myself to read it. I need to read it when the window is open and I'm
yeah,
ready.
I think
And I haven't gone back to it.
that's a good mentality. I mean, it was sort of similar back in 2010, maybe 2011, when Paul Cornell was writing Action Comics.
Hmm.
When Superman was not in the book, Cornell used Lex Luthor as the lead character in Action Comics for a while. And Death from Sandman showed up there in one issue. And that was a big deal because that was really the first time that a Sandman character had crossed over into the main DC universe in a really long time. And it was a really great issue too, because Death was kind of appraising Lex Luthor and his overriding selfishness uh, in a way that was really charming. And like he couldn't possibly believe that there was a reward waiting for the end of the lives of good people unless there was something to gain from someone else. Like maybe forgiveness is its own reward. Like that concept was just totally alien to Lex Luthor.
Hmm.
And it was funny the way that they put that. So, in that sense, actually involving the Sandman himself in this I recognize that it was a big deal, but like it was just
Hmm.
it didn't have an emotional punch that it
Yeah.
probably could have if I had read that series in its entirety.
I was looking up on this story and was able to find Entertainment Weekly had interviewed Scott Snyder after this issue had dropped. And Snyder had said about how he'd rewritten an email 3 different times that he was going to write to Neil Gaiman. He said he'd met him a few times, that they were good with each other, but he was like, he's using his baby, and asking permission. And he's like, I just didn't think he was going to say yes or anything at all. So I had this whole long explanation of how he's going to be a driving force in the series, how he's going to be used. This is what I'm doing with him. And Gaiman's response was just like, sounds great. And then that was it. It's like, sure, sounds good.
Yeah,
All
Paul Cornell
right,
said
that's nice.
something similar about bringing death into Action Comics, and he seemed cool because I think at the end of the day too, especially if you read a story like whatever happened to the Cape Crusader,
Hmm.
pretty easy to glean that Neil Gaiman is a fan of
Yeah.
superheroes,
Hmm.
So I like that he's cool with it.
Yeah.
And And I mean, it makes sense in the way that the story needs it to make sense. But I don't know, like even if I was talking to a hardcore Sandman fan, I don't know how much of a selling point that should be,
Yeah,
honestly, because Dream's involvement overall, like he plays a couple of critical points in certain issues, but
sure.
I wouldn't say he's a driving force of this whole story.
Yeah. If you sold it as like, oh man, if you love Dream, you gotta read Dark Knight's Metal. If that's your selling point, they're gonna be disappointed.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Greg Capullo's art in this.
Oh boy.
Ooh boy. Let's just leave it at that and let's just move on. No. That's an ooh boy in the positive aspect, correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Good. Because yeah, I think if there was an artist for something like this, it was Greg Capullo.
Yeah,
Insane.
I'm just the you look at if you look at Capullo, any Capullo page,
Hmm.
like particularly if it's like a full-on face shot of Batman,
Yeah.
it is deceptively complex. Like you might be tricked into thinking that his art style is simplistic, but he implants such minute detail into different things. So when the force, his artistic force is put onto a book like this,
Hmm.
that's so driven by really imaginative and cosmic concepts. Man, he goes all out, and there is a shocking level of detail in a lot of just the insanity that he draws over those six
Yeah.
issues. Um, it is very abrupt though at the end when it transitions into a different artist, and Death Metal did the same thing.
Hmm.
The the ending for this series and the sequel series, they're very similar in the sense that there's just like one gigantic heroic weapon that helps to completely resolve things over the course of like a page, and then there's a hard break and there's a different artist for the very end coda of each story. And I'm not cool with that. I feel like Capullo should have been like the full-on artist for the entirety, including like even though it's just a relatively small amount of pages or a small number of
It's
pages,
basically the epilogue.
yeah, that epilogue should have been drawn by him. And it would give it a little bit more consistency, and I think would have
M
made it feel less jarring.
Mikel Yanin. When Tom King was on here, he told me how to pronounce it, and I think that's it, or it's something close. He did the
Who
epilogue in issue 6.
And he's great. I love
Uh-huh.
him. I
Yeah,
love his work. I always have.
absolutely.
Ever since I Am Suicide, when I first really got to absorb it. Oh man, that guy is a generational talent. But just in terms of consistency for this story and what it was
Yep,
trying to say, Capullo should have been the artist for that epilogue, I
I
think.
agree. He, like you said, there's battle scenes, there's universal flippings, there's lightning everywhere and stuff. But I think there, as you said, with minute detail of is that with those the big money shots. But then he continues to do such a great job on issue 1. Batman's upstairs in a study. Nothing fancy about that, and that shot is just fantastic. There's when Batman finds the Batman Who Laughs in issue 6 down in the cave, and he like his eyes are glowing, but the rest of him is just basically, it's just black.
Perfect.
That looks fantastic. The Bat Cave that he's in looks fantastic. I think the fight between Batman, Joker, and Batman Who Laughs, I think is also like drawn very, very well. And so it's like those are just examples of really small moments in this story that to me hit just as much as look at the big mega shot here with all these characters and all this stuff happening. And maybe even more impactful. He I don't, it's not, it's more the story. Actually, yeah, it's more the story than the art on why I feel about this book the way that I do. Because it's really good to look at.
It
It's
is.
kind of eye
It is.
candy.
Yeah. Oh, most definitely. And especially at a large size too. I mean,
Oh
the
man.
larger formats of either like a deluxe edition hardcover or an absolute do
Hmm.
these pages a lot of favors, and that's true of his work on Batman, of course, but it's certainly true here just because They ask Capullo to do some pretty insane pages in this story.
Hmm.
And there are those moments where the visual look of the pages are more interesting than the story itself. Um, but at least, I mean, that does a lot to bring people on the ride. And Capullo definitely brought his A game to this and to death metal too, for what it's worth.
Yep. How does death metal work for you compared to metal?
I think it works better.
Okay.
Um,
I never read it.
as as fun as metal is for a story that is like very deeply rooted in Batman mythology,
Hmm.
death metal does broaden things out a bit, and it is more explicitly a DC universe wide story, and I think that works in its favor.
Gotcha. Okay.
There are also tie-ins to death metal that I think you might feel a little more motivated to read. Death metal, as someone who kind of jumped into DC event storytelling with Infinite Crisis, death metal brings in Superboy Prime, and there's one tie-in issue that is actually co-written between Snyder and Jeff Johns that is specifically dedicated to Superboy Prime that does a really good job of paying off a lot of things that Johns had done with him in years past, whether it's in Infinite Crisis, the Sinestro Corps War, Blackest Night, whatever you
Hmm.
want to name. Um, does a really good amount of stuff there. And death metal is a little more focused on Wonder Woman, especially by the end. So I think death metal learns the lessons of metal a little bit better.
Hmm.
And I think it's easier might be the wrong word. It's a bit of a smoother read than metal
Yeah.
is.
I was
But
never against. I may have tried starting the first issue, and it was another case of like, I'm not feeling this. But it was, I'd rather do it so I at least know. Read it so that I at least know.
Mhm.
And there is like a day I will end up going to it. Don't know when that day's going to be, but it's going to happen.
If you did it, I'd recommend reading the last arc of Snyder's Justice League first.
Yeah, fair
And
enough.
that there's some cool Batman stuff in there too.
Ooh.
Some themes that we had seen before, particularly in like the DCAU in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, but it does ramp up the tension in an interesting way to lead into the core main
Yeah.
sequel series.
All right. Before I ask you some questions, I want to ask you this question. Do you have anything we haven't mentioned that you were frothing at the bit to talk
I
about?
want to know who your favorite Dark Knight is out of all of the ones that we met.
Oh, let's see. I'm trying to think of like issues of those one shots. It's probably the Batman Who Laughs. Uh, Tynan, he wrote that one shot. And I remember, and it's been a while since I've read those. For some reason, the Dawnbreaker, I think Tony Daniel did that one. That one sticks out. Of like,
Dawnbreaker,
no, that was
Daniel,
the Green Lantern.
yeah, no, Daniel did the Devastator, I think, the
Devastator.
Doomsday
Okay.
Batman hybrid.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Tony Daniel one, I remember sticking out of I liked that one a lot. Actually, so it's funny that I say that I loved the one shots. I think the Cyborg one I wasn't much of a fan of. And then the other ones I really liked. I think the Dawnbreaker was the Green Lantern, the female Green Lantern dark Batman. I think people didn't like that one. And that was one I was like, I like this one. I thought that was cool.
Oh, he was still
Um,
Bruce Wayne, but there was Bryce Wayne that was the drowned, the
the Drowned.
Aquaman.
Okay, so see, it's
Yeah.
I'm so fuzzy on all the names.
Well, hey,
Um,
there's a
the
lot of stuff here in this
That's true.
story.
Yeah. I don't have any
Yeah.
more capacity in my head. But it's like I want to give something more because I feel like the easy answer of everybody's would be Batman Who Laughs. So that's where I'll go to the Devastator. Um, Probably that one.
Yeah, I think
How about
that's
you?
up there. I like the Devastator too. I think I like the Red Death, the Flash crossover
Yeah.
just a little bit more because Barry was still there,
Hmm.
and I thought that provided kind of a fun dichotomous kind of dynamic
Yeah.
between this corrupted Bruce Wayne and Barry Allen. And that one shot was Joshua Williamson and Carmine Di Giandomenico, who was
Oh
that
yeah.
was the creative team of The Flash at the time. So
Nice.
it felt like an extension of that
Sure.
book. I guess I did have some issues though with all the one shots to a certain degree.
Okay.
I'm not as enamored with the Batman Who Laughs overall
Okay.
because I feel like they definitely overexposed him in the
Mm-hmm.
years following. He
Yeah.
was interesting in the first part of it, but I guess my issue with all of them to certain degrees is that the story ostensibly is about a combined sort of army of Bruce Waynes with all of the formidability and intelligence and raw power that entails to certain degrees. But I don't know if the writing necessarily communicated that these were Bruce Wayne as effectively as they could have. They felt very different, and maybe it's because they were corrupted. You know, Batman takes I think a key element of his identity is the fact that he does try to be incorruptible and largely
Mm-hmm.
succeeds. So if you corrupt Batman, what does that look like? Well, the voices of each character sounded a little bit too different for me to fully buy into the idea that they were Bruce Wayne.
Gotcha.
And feel like that could have been handled a little bit better. But that's a problem with all of them, except for
Mm-hmm.
maybe the Devastator, because his whole deal seemed to be that he was really incensed that Superman turned and killed everybody that he loved, and Devastator was obsessed with the idea of saving the world from being taken in by the hopefulness of Superman. He said the hopefulness of Superman made us too weak so that when he turned on us, we were totally unprepared and our world fell. And I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else again. That felt the most like Bruce Wayne to me out of all of them,
Mm-hmm.
but they all kind of had issues in my head of
Sure.
actually sounding like Bruce Wayne.
I hmm. You're a what do you want to say? It's a positive term. I'll say you're a more clinical thinker in that stuff to where then in listening to it's like that's probably the approach I should have had in reading it. And
Oh,
I took it a
I
very surface level, I think, in which my instant thoughts are just like, oh, this isn't Bruce Wayne. So it's just like easier for me, I guess, to I don't think as this isn't a slant. I feel like it sounded like it's a slant on you. So don't take it that way. I promise. Of like I'm just like as is on the page and I go to the next panel. I think is how I read each one of these because to me was, oh, you're not Bruce Wayne. But now what you just said is like I really honestly did want to read those before we talked about them, but time didn't allow it. And like I don't know, it's gonna be fun to revisit those because I'm gonna want to do those sooner than later now that I just read
sure.
these and like in your input of what you said, because then now you may have just ruined all of those one shots for me. And I'll
Well,
just
I
toss them
mean,
in the trash.
the only reason that I bring that up is because
Sure.
conceivably a lot of the tension or a lot of the source of a lot of the tension in Metal should be
Yeah.
that this is a whole bunch of Bruce Waynes.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
sounds like it should be terrifying, but I could just never fully buy that
Yeah.
they were Bruce
And
Wayne.
that's fair. Um, okay, so that well, with that said, are you good? Do you want me to ask some favorites?
Yes, you've got a question?
Sure.
Okay. This is a big one here. What was your favorite part of Dark Knight's Metal?
Gosh, I'm going to avoid the tie-in material
Okay.
because it might have been in there if I'm being
You
comprehensive.
can
In
do
the
an
core,
if there's one. Okay, so we'll say I will only speak of these six issues because that's what we're covering.
Mhm.
But you can definitely I'll allow it an honorable mention. If a favorite part of the whole thing, you can say that, but then also follow it up with in metal though, in just these six issues, if you want to go that route. Let's throw it out there.
The Batman Lost one shot
Hmm.
that Snyder, I think, and Tynion co-wrote, if I'm remembering correctly. That was a cool exploration of just the Batman side of being lost because
Hmm.
there's not a lot of service that's given to that in the main miniseries, and I think there is value there. So if you haven't read that, give it a shot, take a look at it. I
It
don't think
looks
it's a
familiar. Like I think I did, but I couldn't tell you. Like, hey, here's $100. Tell me what happens in it. I couldn't
right, yeah,
come up with anything.
sure. And I think that's pretty understandable. I mean, there's like we talked about, there's a lot of different things
That's
that
true.
are zipping around here. And I have a hard time keeping the narrative just on track because of
Sure.
the volume of stuff. In
Hmm.
terms of the core miniseries, I probably liked the lead up to the end and the actual fight between Batman, Joker, and Batman Who Laughs. I felt like that was a really fun blow off for everything that we had just read
Hmm.
because it brings in a pretty familiar characterization of the Joker, and I like the idea that Snyder toys with of the Batman Who Laughs could not have comprehended Batman and Joker teaming up, and that led to his downfall. That's a cool idea.
I agree.
And it's drawn wonderfully. And the Batman Who Laughs reaction to that deception was also very appropriate. So that's probably my favorite part. Maybe that's a recency bias since that's the most recent issue I read, but I remember being like, yeah, this feels like it's a continuation of the Snyder stuff.
You know, I didn't think about it till now, but do you think that Scott Snyder was possibly influenced by the 2000, I think it was 2000, maybe 2001, comedy Zoolander? I'll explain. Because in that movie, uh, Zoolander himself, he needs to go in hiding. And where's the last place people would look for him? In the residence of his arch nemesis, Hansel. He's so hot right now. That mindset, kind of what you just said, of Batman Who Laughs would not at all consider Batman and his arch nemesis teaming together. I think there's a connection there. If I ever get to ask Scott Snyder, which I did meet him at a con last year, damn, that was my opportunity. Next time, were
Next
you
time.
influenced by Zoolander? And if he busts out of Blue Steel, I'll pass out. Um, but
That's
okay.
a good connection.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. That's the that's the most thought worthy thing I have in this whole discussion, I think.
Oh,
Um,
no.
the okay, I love that part. And that's one that I did jot down for the sake of difference, and it actually was the second thing I thought of. Um, and this is strange. I love I don't know if to say love. I really like the Oblivion bar scene.
Sure.
Granted, I think it's pretty exposition heavy. It is wrapping up. It's where everybody is, they're off the map, meeting up here, kind of updating what's going on elsewhere. I assume that you're seeing in these tie-in stories. And then it ends, it's like a moody piece, and then it ends in absolute horror with the Batman Who Laughs showing up and, murdering, and they all escape. So it ends in chaos of like, this is a cool, to me, short story, you know? Um, and I don't know. I really like obviously how that looks. So this is another Capullo small moments. It's characters talking in a dimly lit bar. It nails it. Like the mood, the coloring, and everything. I just really dig that. And Batman's not in it, which is the thing that's like the most mind blowing.
Hmm.
Um, and Batman's not in it, and then that's where I like also thought I brought up what you just mentioned of that fight at the end. But for the sake of talking about something else, I'll say the Oblivion bar. Uh,
I think that's a great choice. I mean, Snyder cut his teeth writing Dick Grayson, right?
yeah.
He's got a really
Hmm.
good command of Dick Grayson's voice. Damian is in there too. It's still rooted in sort of the Batman of it all,
Hmm.
but uh, having such well-defined characters, especially when they think they're on the cusp of the end of the world, yeah, that's a great moment.
Thank you. Favorite panel. Good luck.
Yeah, my God. It might be the opening splash at the beginning with the League, just because that's just the first hint of how expansive the story is going to get.
That's true.
And it does a good job of whetting the appetite, I think, for what's to come before,
Yeah.
the other stuff that we talked about, like maybe some of the momentum being derailed. But that one's really strong. Um, there's one pretty cool moment in one of the tie-ins where the Red Death builds his own Batmobile in like 30 seconds. He's like, it used to
Hmm.
take me months to build one of these. Now I can do it instantly. And that's a moment where it's like fueled by the Speed Force, and he's going to use that to destroy uh Barry. That's a cool moment. Um, in the you already mentioned the panel of Batman just showing up to confront the Batman who laughs.
Hmm.
It's comparatively simple when you
Hmm.
look at a lot of the other pages in this book,
Yeah.
but it still manages to he's out of the 10th metal armor at this point because it serves no use against the Batman who laughs. And there's just something that's classically like comic book conflict about here's the battle that's joined. This is the end. And this is
Hmm.
the conflict where we're gonna get to see Batman kick some ass. On that basis alone, I think I love that page because he's just so ready. He's so
Yeah.
ready to break his jaw in as many places as he can.
Like that. Yeah. That's just ah. So that I had that one written down. So again, for the sake of something else to talk about, which I kind of shout out first off, Capullo's cover for issue number one. How freaking cool and creative of the heavy metal sign, and he's got one of the Justice League members on each finger, each focal point.
Yeah.
Brilliant, masterful, love it. Well done. But my pick is I alluded to earlier of like even simpler than Batman arriving in the Batcave is Batman in the study.
Mm,
Images without context in creating a story. I go to this all the damn time uh on this podcast, but it's like that's just cool to me. It's really freaking cool. I like it. Batman and Shadow. Um yeah, it's simple. Sometimes simple just works.
agreed.
Would you like to see this adapted in animation?
I don't think so. I think
Ooh,
I think it's too messy,
too much?
unless they did, I mean, the prior sort of series of DC animated films had kind of through lines that went through them. Um, and maybe if they actually decided to commit to a long form story, maybe with adaptations of Snyder's other Batman stories and then
Hmm.
culminating in this, it could work. But if they just decided to do this on its own, I think it'd be too much of a mess, personally.
I'd welcome the challenge because especially being a story that I'm not a big fan of, it may give it the opportunity to create a medium that I am a fan of, you know? Don't know that it would. I'm with you on the sense of like they could not do a 70-minute movie on Dark Knight's Metal. I just
No.
don't think wouldn't work at all. I don't know that I'd be interested. I haven't watched Crisis. The three, the third part just came out. I've just been waiting for all three parts so I can just kind of basically watch them all in one week rather than scattered. I don't know if three parts like that would be too much for Dark Knight's Metal, that I'd still feel exhausted. Um, I don't know the happy medium, but I think I would welcome it, but it'll never be name 10 and it would make my list. Like, it's got to just be one they just say, hey, it's coming. It's like, okay, I'll check it out because I check them all out eventually.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, not too, oh, what do you want to say, energetic to get a hashtag movement going, adapt
Right.
metal.
Release
Let's
the
see.
Snyder cut.
Yes. Oh my God. Well done. What are your final words on this before we head out of here, Mr. Cloud? Do you have any final words left of Dark Knight's Metal?
I think it's worth checking out. I mean, I would not want to get anybody's hopes up, especially if you're like a Batman primary fan. Um,
Cough. Look
this,
over here.
yeah, hey, you're you're among like-minded folks. No, I
Yeah.
mean, it's just such a fascinating artifact of DC event storytelling because it is rooted in the reality of Batman's dominance in the line.
Hmm.
There are, I mean, you recap them every month. There's a lot of Batman books that get
Hmm.
published by DC Comics. Understandably so. He is the most popular character that they have. He has
Yeah.
the most crossover appeal with general audiences. Pretty much every box he ticks, there are people who believe that there are DC comics and there are Batman comics, and they are not the same thing.
That's right.
Um, so orchestrating a DC universe event around that is a cool idea. And your mileage may vary compared to the mileage that we got out of it, but I wouldn't go into it thinking that this is going to be like the next significant chapter. If you've just finished reading the Snyder and Capullo ongoing Batman run, for instance, don't go into Metal thinking like it is the canonized next phase of all those Batman stories you've just read. They say that's what it is. I think the reality of it is a little more nuanced than that, just because it pulls from, yes, it pulls from those, but it also pulls from a lot of other things
Hmm.
to sort of make up the playing ground that it moves through. But I do think it's worth some time, especially if you're like interested in DC event storytelling. This is quite an interesting exercise because of what Ryan and I both talked about, the ambition. There is a lot of it in this story, and ambition should be part of it.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that it's always like followed through on in the
Yeah.
most efficient or best way. So it is a story that swings like crazy. And for you, maybe it'll hit. Didn't quite hit for me. It sounds like it didn't quite hit for you. Maybe it hit
Did
less
not.
for you than for
It
me.
didn't hit for me.
But I don't think that means that you should avoid it,
I agree.
especially since it's available in so many places.
Yeah. Everywhere. Uh,
Yeah.
I think so. Originality, there's nothing like Dark Knight's Metal in DC comic books at least. I haven't read all comic books in the world. In DC, there's nothing like it. So it is at least like it's original. We said you just said it again. We've been saying it's ambitious. Um, doesn't hit for me. That doesn't ever mean that I'm going to go out and just, talk crap about it and just tell anybody avoid it or whatever. Before even recommending it, I'd be like, what are your tastes? Because I know where mine are, and this didn't work for me. Hearing could help me gauge better of like, you know what? I think there's a better possibility you would like this more than I would. Um, I wouldn't act. The best thing anybody can do is to just try it out themselves and then come up with their own opinion. Um, that's what I did. That's where I've landed. Um, you got me to read it again. I'm glad I read it again. It was a refresher. Like I am. I have no regrets on revisiting it because it did cement my feelings a little bit more and had me read it a little bit differently. I'm definitely going to read the one shots differently now. Thank you. Um, but yeah, like overall, like I don't know. That's not necessarily the kind of praise I think people would want to hear for a book, but also it's not like me dogging on it either. It's original, it's ambitious. Your mileage may vary. Try it and come up with your own opinion. If you haven't yet, which is kind of crazy that somebody be almost an hour and a half into this and be like, you know what? I think I'll read it now. However, I don't really know that you and I spoiled it. Like, there's a lot in
No,
there. There's a lot in there that people be like, oh, they didn't mention that.
even talking about the very end of it, there's a lot of stuff that happens in between
Yeah.
the course of the main series, to say nothing of all the stuff in the tie-ins.
And I
So,
got I got through checking off like everything on my list here and seeing where we're at in the conversation, like time wise. And I'm like, I hope I hope Chris feels like we did a good job because I think there's a lot of stuff that we didn't even bring up. Um, but hey, that's
well,
how it is.
if we did that though, this show would be a lot longer,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of stuff in it that honestly doesn't have very much to do with Batman.
yeah, that's
So,
true. We got to
I
keep it
mean, but
focused on the
yeah,
bat.
if we're focusing on the Batman specific elements of it, then yeah, I think we did a pretty complete job of it.
I think we did too.
Um,
We're
I mean,
pros.
there's a whole Superman angle here that I think is fun to talk about.
Hmm.
But when it Batman is the beating heart of this story for better or worse.
Yeah.
So by focusing on how this story uses Batman's iconography, particularly in the creation of the enemies that he fights here and that the League fights, I think we did a pretty good job.
I think we
So
did too. Go
kudos
us.
to your organizational skills.
Yeah, okay. Kudos to you for bringing the intelligence to this conversation. I
No,
appreciate
no,
it.
no.
Uh, with that being said, I do appreciate you taking the time out and coming back on here, sir. It will not be as long next time, I hope. Um, I'll extend the invite as long as you're willing.
Of
Um,
course.
go ahead and plug away anything and everything that you'd like to.
Certainly. Well, thanks again for the invite. I appreciate it, even though I bugged you and made you
No.
read a story you don't necessarily like it.
That's
Uh,
yeah. Damn you.
I
Talk
know,
to you in
I know.
3 years, Chris Clow.
But I appreciate your willingness to go on
Sure.
the journey, and I had a good time, so thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
Most regular thing is probably the comic binge on YouTube, where Paul Herman and I do a whole host of comic book reading on various topics. We are probably going to get together later in the week that we're recording this to talk about Deadpool and Wolverine, which
Ooh.
is coming to theaters in a few days by the time we're talking.
Hmm.
And we are doing that sub-series Knights Never Die, where me and Javi Trujillo and occasionally Paul will dive into individual issues of Grant Morrison's Batman run. We've had some scheduling issues, like any show that does not pay our bills, right? It seems like that's a
Yeah.
pretty common thing.
Yep.
But next time we get together, we're talking about Arkham Asylum, a serious house on serious Earth, since it's kind of
Nice.
an important
Hmm.
story leading into The Clown at Midnight. Uh, before we then go off onto the rest of the run and barrel toward something like RIP.
That is a
Uh,
great double feature in comic book form. I never thought of that. Arkham
oh,
Asylum
sure.
and The Clown at Midnight. That's yeah, that's good stuff. Well done.
They rhyme. They definitely rhyme in
Hmm.
certain areas. I think Arkham Asylum is a little more opaque in the way that it's read, and it certainly
Hmm.
helps to read like the notes, but
Yeah.
it's fun to read those together, definitely. I'm looking forward to checking the Absolute out for Clown at Midnight. Um, I've also got a Star Trek podcast called
Mm.
Discovery Debrief. We finished talking about Star Trek Discovery, so if you're interested in a group of longtime franchise fans' thoughts on the final season of Star Trek Discovery, you can check all those out. We are planning on getting together pretty soon to talk about the second season of Star Trek Prodigy that just dropped on Netflix a couple of weeks ago, and Star Trek Lower Decks is coming back for its final season a little later in the year. So we'll have to say goodbye to those characters, which kind of sucks because that's a really funny show. But yeah, that's about the
That's
sum of
it.
it.
That's it. Wow. You're a busy man. I've got one
Yeah,
thing to plug, and it's this show. That's all. That's all I got.
this is a big show though, man. This is a big
Huge
one.
show. It's big. Everybody's listening. Uh, well, I'll take the time to say that I do enjoy the comic binge. Um, I've been fortunate enough to be a guest on there a couple times. When you've been there, and then somewhere I think it was just me and Paul, and then one of a Ninja Turtle show with Paul and two other guests. I apologize, I can't
Mhm.
remember their names. Good stuff with Comic Binge, especially if you want Batman focus. You just said it yourself. Your sub-series of Knights Never Die. Have at it,
Well, if there's
people.
any
Listen.
particular Grant Morrison issue that you would want to join us for,
Hmm. Oh
let me know.
goodness. Okay. And I'm not just saying okay. Like, okay. I
Yeah.
was recently, you can check out on X/Twitter, whichever you guys call it these days. I was a guest on the Gotham Chronicles podcast with Dominic. He was a very nice gentleman, inviting me on that show. Check out the feed there because the link to that podcast is there. And that was a fun talk with just Batman. But if you want to follow just the Batman Book Club, it's on the socials at the Batman BC. Subscribe to the Batman Book Club YouTube channel because Pete and we've said it for probably 8 months now straight. We're going to dive into No Man's Land Omnibus. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. I promise. It's going to happen. Subscribe there. If you want to support the show, a variety of ways you can do it. First one, patreon.com/thebatmanbc. Second one, tpublic.com. Type in TBBC for the Batman Book Club in the search on that page. But if you want to do something that's cheap, let's see, by cheap I mean free, and it only costs you your time, and it's very easy to do, and it also is very impactful for the show. Rate and review the show wherever you listen to it on your podcast feed. So Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, wherever. Go to the rate and review page and rate and review the show, because the more reviews the show gets, the more it helps spread the word. And as we all know, that word is panic. So for Chris Clow, the man, I am Ryan Lauer. And until next time, we love Batman Cops.